Hey everyone, welcome to my studio. In this video I want to share with you my favorite watercolor palette that I use in my studio. I have lots of other palettes. I've tried lots of other palettes, but this is the one I use the most and I love it. Keep watching. In this video I'm going to share the 6 reasons why this is my favorite palette. Hey everyone, welcome to my studio. In this video, I'm going to share with you my favorite palette that I use here in my studio. Now, I've had a lot of palettes. I've had metal palettes, like this one. I've had small, portable plastic palettes. This was my very first palette I ever owned for watercolor. I've had other plastic palettes that are a little larger. I actually have a video about this palette. I really like this palette for travel and for plein air painting. But in the end, this has become my favorite palette. And so in this video, I want to share the 6 reasons why this is my favorite. And I want to help you decide if this is a palette that's right for your studio. All right, reason number 1. This is a porcelain palette. This is the Stephen Quiller Porcelain Palette by Jack Richardson. At the end of the video and in the description below, I'm going to share with you how you can purchase this palette, where you can buy it, and how much it costs. But for now, let's just take a look at the benefits of this palette. It is porcelain, and that means it has a wonderful surface for mixing paints on. Let me show you. I can mix out here colors and pull them out, and when we put the paint on the surface of this porcelain palette, it's wonderful to see the paints. They don't contract. They don't pool into small little puddles of color. In fact, they kind of expand out onto the palette. And as you add water, as you mix paints on the palette, you can see you get just a lovely flow of color on this porcelain palette. Porcelain, in my opinion, is the best surface for watercolor paints, for mixing and for using in your studio. So that's what the paint does when you put it on the surface. Let's compare that to a metal palette. This metal palette I shared with you earlier. It's a nice little palette. It's great for plein air painting outdoors, but one disadvantage of these little metal palettes are when you put the color, as you can see there, on the palette, it beads up. It doesn't really, it makes it a little difficult to use the palette because the colors contract. The pool of pigment contracts, right? You can see how it's doing that. And that's a little bit difficult if you're doing something like that and you're mixing your paints and that kind of thing. And you want to see what color you have, and then, but if the color beads up like that, sometimes it can be really difficult to see what color you actually have on your palette. So you can see that, what this is doing here with the beading up of the color in comparison to what the Stephen Quiller Porcelain Palette does. When I put color down on here, it doesn't contract. And you can get a nice big pool of color, and you can really see it against this beautiful white color of the porcelain palette. So, benefit number 1, it's a porcelain mixing surface, and when compared to other types of mixing surfaces, especially metal, it does a beautiful job of showing you the nice big pools of color as you mix your colors. All right, benefit number 2, this palette does not stain. Because it is a porcelain surface, it doesn't stain. Here's one of my other plastic palettes that I've had in my studio for years. And you can see, even though I've really tried to clean this surface, it stains. Over time, plastic surfaces will usually stain. It's very difficult to keep them clean. And you might wonder, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, when you're mixing your colors in watercolor, you really want to be able to mix on a white surface. Because if you mix your color, but there's another color staining the surface that you're mixing your color on, it can be somewhat difficult to see the true color you're mixing because of that stained surface in the background. So for that reason, porcelain, and this Stephen Richardson palette specifically, is wonderful because not only does it not stain, it cleans up really easily. I can come in here and just wipe up colors, and I get right back to my original white surface, and it does not stain. And that's just a property of the porcelain itself, that it cleans up beautifully. All right, benefit number 3, a big mixing area. You can see here the big mixing area that I have in the middle of this palette. Let me measure this for you. This particular palette is 13 inches square, 13 by 13 inches. It's about 1.25 inches thick. So if you're wondering whether it'll fit on your table in your painting area, you can see it's fairly big. But that's real advantage is because of the large mixing area. Now, some palettes have smaller mixing areas. The palette is divided up into a variety of different little wells. And I like, in contrast to that, however, I like this really big mixing area. For example, I can bring out some color, and then I can come in and say, well, okay, I'm going to use that, but I also want to use a little of this blue. And I can create big, again, big puddles of the color. But then I can also see how the colors I've chosen begin to interact with other colors, right? And I can, all of a sudden, I've got a variety of colors now that I can choose from on my palette, as I have this large area where I can either have the pure pigment or mix that in with an adjacent color. And for that reason, I like this big area, and I can get a real big mix of color and then blend them all together. And so that was reason number 3, big mixing area. Reason number 4, I love this palette. It is because there are a multitude of wells for my paint. There's 24 wells for paint here on the circle, and they're big and they're deep, but they're not so they're big enough that I can paint put even one of my large brushes in there will fit. And that's important because you don't want to damage your brushes when you're continually putting them in these wells. So it's good to have a large wells, as you see here. But in addition to that, then of course, if you just want to mix up a nice amount, for example, let's just say down here, one of our reds, if I want to just get a nice big mix, I can just pull a lot of water out of that and just mix up a nice mix of that color, and it stays right in this well. So if I do want to keep the color pure and not mix with anything else, because this is pretty deep and hold a fair bit of water, I can get a pretty good amount of that pigment mixed in there or wet in there. So in addition to that, the reason I like this, not only do I have a lot of wells for paints, they're deep, they're big, but also I like how it's organized in the color wheel. And so I keep my colors in the traditional color wheel design. I have my warm colors on one side, and then I come around and transition to my cool colors, and I really like having my colors in the wheel. Other palettes are not in a circular design. They're usually in rows and columns of colors like we've seen here. And you can still put them somewhat in the order of the color wheel, but I really like having the pigments actually in a circle, which this palette again does that beautifully. I said there were 24 wells. There's actually 32 because there's 8 more around the outside, and that's a perfect place to put your neutrals, your browns, things like that. And so I just love the layout of this palette. All right, reason number 5, I love this palette. And this might seem like a funny reason, but it's heavy. This palette weighs over 9 pounds. And again, it's not for plein air. It's not for bringing out in the field to paint, obviously, but it's a studio palette. And I like that it's heavy because it doesn't move. As I'm, mixing colors and doing various things, I don't have to worry about this palette moving anywhere on the table as I mix paints. And that's not always the case with some of these other lighter palettes, which can move on the table. So the weight is great in my opinion. And the last reason number 6 that I love this palette is that it does come with a cover. And you can see the name here. And some people, if you watch some videos, actually suggest that this cover is a con, not a pro. It's a negative about this because it doesn't seal. Okay, when you place it on here, the cover is slightly larger than the palette, but I don't find that to be a problem at all. In fact, I like that. Again, I don't move this palette very much. It stays where it is, and so I don't really care if the cover doesn't seal, and I really don't want it to seal tightly and airtight because I really want my paints in between painting sessions to really dry out. I don't want them to get moldy. And so having that palette on there just protects the colors, protects it from dust getting in there and that kind of thing, but doesn't have to seal in my opinion. So I think that that's a real plus that it comes with that. Alrighty, so there you go. The 6 reasons why I love this Stephen Quiller Porcelain Palette by Jack Richardson. All right, let's take a look at where you can purchase this palette. You can see here I have the Amazon.com up on my phone. This particular palette costs around $90. Now that's not cheap, but I think this palette is well worth that price. It's a great investment for your studio. So hopefully this video is helpful. It's helpful for you to see the advantages to this palette, to see how it's laid out, and just to hear the reasons why I like it so much. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you stay notified of future videos, and I hope you have a great day.